The debate around whether you should map your API endpoints directly to your MCP tools is one that I think is going to rage online for quite some time yet. But there are certain instances where doing that may not necessarily be the best use of those tools, and actually presenting your users with a completely custom tool that isn't directly mapped against any particular single endpoint is going to be the best way to go. In this video, I'm going to show you how to build a custom tool that uses 3 different API endpoints to ultimately form the response that it returns and then expose that as an MCP tool. Let's get into it. So over here in Zuplo, I've got a project set up, and it's a very basic API that exists inside of the gateway that has a few different API endpoints. We've got one for getting a weather forecast for a city. We have one that gets recommended activities for a city, and one that gets packing suggestions for particular climate types. Now, in these individual states, can't really see how necessarily these would fit together, but ultimately they are part of an application that helps people plan for their trips. And what I want to do here is present all of these in unison as an MCP custom tool. So in order to actually get going doing that, we need to create the basis for the tool itself. So all MCP tools that aren't directly related to specific endpoints need to be added as a custom module. So let's start by doing that. We head over here to modules, and we will do a new request handler, and we'll call it plan trip. What we're going to create here with this tool is effectively something that will use all 3 of these endpoints to form what it is that a user who specifies a particular city should think about in terms of weather, what things that they should pack, and what activities they might want to undertake in that particular city that they're going to go to. So we've got our request handler here, and what I'll do is I will pull over one element of this and I'll talk you through that. So for the first piece, we will get the weather that we need, and we're going to drop this in here. What this is doing is it's going to take an input which comes from the request.json here on line 5, and we're going to pull out the destination that gets specified by the user. Here we're just going to make sure that this is always going to be sunk down to lowercase so that we've got standardization in the input that we're going to be working with. And then we're going to make a request over to the /weather and then insert the city endpoint on here. Now, this is one of the things that I really want to point out with this, is that this is using a little bit of special Zuplo magic here in this await context dot invoke route. What this is actually going to do is call the route internally before it gets the response back. So rather than making a request externally and then coming back around into the gateway, it's actually going to handle all of this inside of the runtime so that you don't have to make any external requests when invoking endpoints that exist inside of your gateway already, right? We don't want to add additional latency. We don't want to have any additional round trips in this mix. So we have this context.invoke route that allows you to effectively internally call any API endpoint that exists inside of your gateway, which is really useful. So this is going to call that, it's going to get the weather response back, and it's going to assign it off to this constant called weather right here. So we also need to call a couple of other endpoints as well. What we have is we also need to get the activities. And again, you'll see that the approach for doing this and making these calls is exactly the same for each thing. So weather is here, we invoke the route, we get the response. Activities is here, we invoke the route, we get the response, and we cast it off to activities. Same for the packing list, and then do a little bit of analysis on weather for rainy days, whether or not it's going to be rainy or not on any particular day. And then down here at the bottom is what we're actually going to be returning as the response for what is ultimately going to be this tool call. So it's a blob of JSON that effectively combines all of this information from all of these 3 API endpoints together into a single response. So that's what's going to go back to the AI client and into the LLM context window for it to ultimately work with and present the user with their final result. So you can see we just map everything across here in a way that makes sense. You know, what are the activities? What should you pack? What is the weather summary? Where are you going? And what is the climate? Okay, so that's what our tool is actually going to look like. And you can see here that this has all been written in TypeScript, so there is absolutely complete freedom when building these kinds of tools. If you can write it in JavaScript and or TypeScript, then you can add anything you would like to do inside here. And you don't just have to use invoke route if you want to. That makes sense if you're going to be working with routes that already exist inside of your gateway, but you could just as easily use fetch and call something that is external as well, and do a combination of different requests to ultimately get your final result that you return as part of your tool. So now we have the basis of the tool set up. We actually need to now add this in and expose it as our MCP tool that we can use to give the user the responses that we have combined here. So head over to this routes.oas.json, and this is where the magic happens for MCP in Zuplo. What we can do is go here and add a new route. So we need to be able to actually call this. So we'll do a post, and this is going to be for plan trip. Plan a trip. We will give it an operation ID of plan trip, again, just for readability more than anything else. And in this case, now the request handler that we need to do for this is actually going to, rather than mapping to a particular URL or making an external call, we're going to set this to be a function. And we have this set up here in plan trip. So now we're calling the default from plantrip.ts is what we set up over here. We'll save that. So now the next thing that we're going to need to do is to ensure that this plan trip endpoint can actually get the destination that we said we wanted to grab hold of here. We're looking for this, right? So in the request, there is always going to be a destination. We need to make sure that that is something that's actually expected. So it can be specified inside of the OpenAPI specification itself. And you can see we have our plan trip endpoint specified in the OAS right here. So then we'll just put in something that includes a little bit extra as far as the specification, because we want to help the LLM to understand as much as possible around this. So in here, we've got what our requirements are. In this case, we're looking for destination. We also have the full schema for what's going to be returned here as well. So, are these properties, numbers, are they strings, what is it that you can actually expect, just so that it has a better chance of being able to properly work with the data that is returned. What we're actually mapping here in this JSON schema is the output from here. So this return object on line 44 in our module for plan trip is what is effectively being presented as the schema. So you can see we've got what the packing object looks like, what activities look like, what the weather summary looks like, climate, and also the destination. And we're specifying up here that we do require a destination to be specified as well. So that's all in place, and we have saved that. So now we need to go back to the route designer and actually start to expose this as MCP. And in order to do that, what we'll do is go back, click on add, and then we'll add an MCP server from here, and we'll give it our name. We'll call it trip planner. Trip planner MCP is the operation ID. We will give our server a name, trip planner. Version 0.01 is absolutely fine. Now I need to select the tools for this, and we don't want to expose everything here. You could do this, of course. You can say that these could just as easily be individual tools if you wanted them to be, but in order to present the best overall experience, we're just going to take this plan trip endpoint and expose that as our singular tool in this case. What I'm going to do now is just test that this is set up correctly. So I will grab the deployment URL from over here. We'll take this working copy version, and inside of MCP Jam, which is a testing tool for MCP servers, you could just as easily do this with MCP host if you just want to do command line based stuff, or you could use the official model context protocol inspector as well. Works just as well, but MCP Jam's got a little bit of extra flavor to it, and I quite like working with it. So we're going to add this in here. So our server name is Trip Planner, and it is a HTTP connection type. So we'll put in the URL that we copied right there, and we need to add one extra MCP on the end of here. As you can see inside of Zuplo, that is the endpoint we have specified for this particular MCP server. There is no authentication for it. Of course, we can add that as well if we want to. So we can see that that is now connected and everything has come through successfully. So we'll take a look at the tools right here, and we can see that we just have the one tool, which is what we specified in Zuplo as well for plan trip. So now what we can do is actually go ahead and test it. And you can do this by connecting it to any AI client that you would like to use, but I can do this just inside of MCP Jam for demonstration purposes. So I've got a couple of different services attached to this, so I can go into the playground in MCP Jam, and I've got a chat interface here that I can use. And up at the top, I've selected the trip planner, which is basically meaning that this MCP server is available for my chat session that I have going on down here. So now I will ask it to help me plan for my trip to Tokyo. Always on the bucket list though, never actually been. All right, let's run it. So it's going to go ahead and think about it, and it starts to run the planned trip. We get a response back from that, and it comes back and gives us our weather, our recommended activities, and our packing list, and also some additional travel tips as well, all based on what it is that we specified by going and hitting all 3 of the endpoints inside of our gateway via one tool, instead of hitting 3 different tools and then hoping it's going to pull together all of the information, which it would. I think it's very obvious now that it would be possible to do this with 3 individual tool calls, but that isn't going to be the most efficient way to do this. It's going to take quite a lot of extra time, probably at least 3 times as long as it took to do that, whilst it goes and gets the weather, then it gets the activities, then it gets a climate type and figures out how to make all of those individual requests. Whereas in this case, to solve a specific use case, we've got one tool hitting 3 different endpoints, all of them composed together inside of Zuplo, to give a much better, much cleaner and more consistent overall experience for an MCP server. So there you go. That is how you can very quickly implement custom tools for MCP servers inside of Zuplo. If you would like to try this for yourself, there is an example available of what I just showed you. You can go and clone it, work with it, adapt it, do whatever you like with it. You'll find that available at zuplo.com/examples.